Okay. I always love this kind of standing room only. Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the culmination of what has been an extraordinary, intense epic for pretty much everyone in this room in one way or another. I think this school is unique in we have this format of real discussion around work, whether that be foundation through to diploma. Over the past couple of days, we've seen some extraordinary work across the fifth year, which then culminates in a series of nominations, some very rich discussions between the tutors this morning, and then the vote on those who are receiving honors, which will be presenting their work this afternoon. It's incredibly hard to choose, as you can imagine. I am in the really wonderful position of not having to. I just get to oversee the proceedings and to enjoy the presentations. But what has been remarkable in seeing the work from the panels and then again through the passionate advocacy of tutors that are not the tutors of the projects that are here this afternoon is the depth and breadth of the work that you have all achieved. In the cases of pretty much everything you'll see this afternoon, there's not only an extremely accomplished piece of work, but something that resonates across multiple scales, across multiple histories, across time, and has a vision for some kind of future. It touches on the deeply personal, the deeply political, the historic, the mythological, the physical, the spatial. And I think that the work here is a real testament to what I think is hopefully a rosier future, if not one that leaves us with something to think about in our current present. But you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to the extraordinary students. We're going to go from left to right across the room, and I'm going to hand over first to Yeliz. Yeliz, congratulations.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yeliz. I'm from Diploma 6. And this project is called A Function of X, where X, the variable, the unknown, stands for the architecture of risk. A condition that is in some ways highly exact, tightly engineered, data-driven, regulated, and yet it remains profoundly inexact in how it behaves over time across systems under pressure. So I will delve into that through a spatial investigation into how architecture can engage with the accident as a systemic condition that can be embedded in the very logics we design with. I will present it to you in 5 parts. We'll start with the theoretical framing, then move on to the urban research, followed by the disciplinary research. Afterwards, I will show how the emerging ideas unfold across 3 different specific sites. And finally, I will end with a small concluding section. Part 1 is called Risk Society, the Design Lag, and Anti-Fragility. So something happened at the end of the 20th century, at the turn of the 20th century, which transformed us into rats who construct the labyrinth from which they plan to escape. That something was a transition to manufactured risk. A Sigma study by Swiss Re revealed that for the first time, technical man-made disasters had surpassed natural catastrophes. In spite of that, there is a significant increase in proposals and investments for high-risk, high-reward projects. Transit infrastructure is one of the prime examples, progressively driven by emerging technologies, high speeds, hazardous materials, often set in unforgiving environments. But most importantly, the architecture of these crucial infrastructures is growing more and more complex. And there is one simple underlying property of complex systems, which is at the core of this project for me. And that property is the fact that accidents and malfunctions are inherently coded in their designs from the very start. So the design and its breakdown are fundamentally connected, which is a condition that automatically gives birth to an architectural potential, because it suggests that we could go back and forth, design the network from its origins to its growth and deployment, or we could start from the moment at which it breaks down, so that the errors unlock latent qualities of the project and enhance its spatial and operational resilience. The way architecture usually operates is that it waits for the rare, unpredictable, and impactful events, the black swans, and then reacts to them retroactively. there is a very crucial lag, like waiting for the first fire to invent the fire escape. But the systems we design now are bigger and faster and more fragile. They're deeply networked, so we can't afford the same lag. Architecture is structurally blocked from acting before the fact. Planning frameworks demand statistical evidence, but if the failure hasn't happened yet, there is no data. And without data, there is no regulation. Risk remains formally unacknowledged and therefore outside the scope of design. If the architect raises it, it's speculation, but even if the client approves it, it's value engineered out. And even if it's recognized, the system is filled with professionals who appear to manage risk, but in fact outsource its consequences. So nothing moves until something breaks. What I'm arguing here is that design approaches to risky systems remain largely unchallenged, but they should be. We tend to aim for robustness. Instead, we should design infrastructures that don't just endure shocks, but code the failures into their designs, anticipate the possible breakdowns, and benefit from them in the long run. Overcoming the design lag and being anti-fragile means oscillating between control and uncertainty, as well as causality and randomness. In other words, the project tries to reframe infrastructural intervention as an operational pharmacon, which means both poison and remedy at the same time. This is particularly relevant in European cities, which exist at a particular conjunction of dissimilar and even contrasting logics. Paris is a compelling case with its woven network topographies, deeply layered landscapes shaped by centuries of development, intersecting recent topologies of relations. And when networks break, shift, or transform, their nodes, which are generally supposed to be thresholds connecting 2 points, suddenly enter a state of suspension. These places hold the memory or trace of larger systems, yet counter their principles, leading to a strange and unresolved, ambiguous condition. There are two main states that can be observed. On the one hand, when we find a dead node within a working network, like a defective organ within a functioning body. On the other hand, there is the reverse, which is where we come across functioning nodes within dead networks, like and this project is in a way about the possibility to link these two states, both the dormant and the active, making room for speculative redundancies, the special nodes in the network that exist in order to be activated when normalcy breaks down, spaces that only reveal their purpose under extreme or exceptional circumstances. So I guess what I'm proposing is a modified concept of infrastructure which equalizes normality and abnormality in status through the design of anticipatory dormant features. Ultimately, this new model of infrastructure disrupts the usual timeline of a project's design. If traditional models follow a linear progression from conception to completion, this approach resists that order, folding time back onto itself. The project is no longer a fixed entity, but a field of contingencies, reversals, and parallel possibilities. So it's strongly connected to our relation to time and presents our ongoing negotiations with different kinds of futures, which this chronogram frames as a network of interdependent shifts operating on multiple axes. Architectural lineages intersect to inform new systemic thinking. The challenge is to be both deeply disciplinary and radically interdisciplinary at once. With this broader framework, we can explore how a multidirectional relationship can impact or reverse its origins. Think of Schrödinger's cat, which is a thought experiment where a hypothetical cat may be considered simultaneously both alive and dead, while it's unobserved in a closed box, as a result of its fate being linked to a random subatomic event that may or may not occur. What I'm working on is the architectural equivalent of that. The cat in the thought experiment is the spatial organization in this project. Until a risk event happens, the space is in a superposition of multiple potential configurations. When a malfunction occurs, the possibilities converge into a single spatial response. So the proposal itself is a kind of a Rube Goldberg machine. It's thousands of possible chain reactions overlaid on top of one another. And I started to study the mechanisms that would help me experiment with that and to develop a formal kit of parts as well as an operational catalog of kinetic design devices. Then I began testing the architectural implications of these ideas through 3 generations of trains, each operating inside a tightly controlled, high-risk environment. One in vacuum, one underwater, and one along the perimeter of a nuclear facility. These case studies function as a gradient, escalating in scale, complexity, and political implications through which the project's broader framework is applied, challenged, and redefined. The first case engages vacuum-based transit infrastructure, which has to rely on designated emergency stations at regular intervals along the route. But this project extends that logic. An emergency station is not pre-built, but deploys itself in response to failure, spatial production that can be triggered at any moment. The Deleuzian idea of becoming meets Kafkaesque metamorphosis through an infrastructural system that is very much alive. Because depending on the type of malfunction or failure within the system, a different trigger starts a different causal sequence, which then creates a corresponding spatial arrangement, which is then folded back on the design of the system. Architecture in this case is understood as an active interface, automated, performative, short-lived. It occupies a narrow temporal window, compressing spatial logic into a machine for controlled breakdown. It enables the outside to re-enter a condition that had structurally eliminated it. The second site relocates the discussion to the channel tunnel. Here, the transition from normal to abnormal operation comes with a dramatic drop in technological sophistication. Think of Eurostar's additional service tunnel. At first glance, this case looks simple. A train breaks down, passengers are evacuated through a secondary service tunnel. It's a standard fallback, standard redundancy. But the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that this isn't a straightforward emergency plan. It's a carefully layered spatial logic, one that reveals how infrastructures degrade under stress and how architecture absorbs that degradation step by step. When the primary system fails, the user doesn't immediately exit. Instead, they move through a sequence of fallback conditions, from the high-speed train to the sealed tunnel platform, from there into the adjacent service corridor, and eventually, if necessary, into passive, unlit crawl spaces. Each level is more basic than the one before, less infrastructure, less coordination, less design. This descent isn't just physical. As you move further down, the system loses control over your movement. It becomes more primitive, more manual, more opaque. So the architecture here is not kinetic or responsive, it's inert but stratified. It doesn't react in real time. It embeds fallback positions in advance, each one more robust to technological failure, but less spatially legible. It's not about evacuating you fast, it's about slowing down the breakdown just enough to keep you alive. This case study reframes failure not as a moment, but as a sequence, not a rupture, but a gradual unraveling, one that's already encoded in the spatial structure. And it poses the question, what does it mean to design for failure when that failure is already embedded into the layers of the system itself? Meanwhile, the third train passes close to Gravelines, which is a large nuclear facility, and this time, failure is explored as an emergent property of overlapping systems. Here, the project imagines a scenario where cascading disruptions ripple across interconnected networks. The architecture doesn't intervene to repair, but to arrest, cutting links, sealing movement, and enforcing spatial boundaries the system can no longer guarantee. When failure propagates across systems, spatial boundaries close down. The infrastructure doesn't open, it locks. Massive barriers, isolation chambers, and enforced no-go zones from a territorial sarcophagus, a spatial quarantine that protects by severing connection. Even the train that gets stuck between a safe zone and a contaminated one becomes a spatial contradiction. Too risky to proceed, too critical to abandon. It no longer operates as transport, but as containment, suspended in place, frozen in protocol. Design in this context becomes subtractive. To prevent failure from spreading, it subtracts access, subtracts visibility, subtracts interaction. As infrastructures shrink time and space to improve performance, they generate an inverse spatial field, one in which the architecture of the exit becomes slower and longer and heavier. The point is not that we can't get out, it's that getting out now requires its own infrastructure. Each of the three sites functions as a spatial and infrastructural lens through which failure is encountered differently. First, as a punctual mechanical rupture, then as a stratified degradation through fallback layers, and finally as a territorial lockdown triggered by cascading systemic collapse. Across all three, the exit becomes more spatially, temporally, and politically extended. In the first case, it's immediate, but artificially constructed. In the second, it's delayed, stretched across layers of fallback infrastructure. In the third, it's withheld entirely. The trajectory moves from controlled release to managed descent to enforced immobilization. By the final case, the logic reverses. Architecture shifts from enabling movement to actively preventing it. Each case represents an increasingly complex architectural negotiation between inside and outside, but also a recognition that this boundary is no longer stable nor neutral. Architecture is not just mediating risk, it's complicit in the systems that produce it. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have engineered ourselves into devices so complete, so tightly sealed, that leaving them becomes more difficult the more advanced they become. The more control we build, the longer the chain of dependencies we must break to exit. What unfolds is a kind of paradox. Every gain in exactitude results in a deeper inexactitude at the point of failure. The project doesn't attempt to resolve that contradiction. It holds on to it. It proposes that in these systems there is no such thing as pure inside or outside, no total safety, no neutral space. Only a shifting logic of control and breakdown where architecture is both an agent of precision and a witness to its breakdown. This is a project about infrastructure, but it's not really a project about infrastructure, at least not for its own sake. It's about what happens to the discipline of architecture when the systems it interfaces with are no longer stable, local, or recoverable. Can it remain relevant when risk is systemic and design is always already downstream of failure? Can it switch quickly between a dormant and an active state? Can it hold contradictory conditions? Can it be both dead and alive? Can it be the poison and remedy at the same time? Can it be anti-fragile? Can it benefit from failure? Can it acknowledge uncertainty without becoming vague or overly precise? Can it navigate systems that are too complex to map but too consequential to ignore? But even if architecture could answer these questions, even if it could act preemptively, hold contradictions, benefit from failure, it would still be operating within a system that withholds the full picture. The illusion of control is maintained through fragmentation. Each actor is only offered a partial selective understanding of the whole. The passenger receives diagrams and reassurances, the analyst sees threshold and probabilistic forecasts, the investor sees a stable risk-optimized asset, the hacker sees structural vulnerabilities, the operator sees the breakdown live, the maintenance worker sees failure's aftermath routed through technical shortcuts. In architecture, a generalist profession is expected to coordinate across these blind spots without being granted full access to the system itself. And it might be somewhat absurd to try and see the full picture because it's not possible, but a tolerance for open-endedness is only achieved by designing mechanisms to engage with the unknown. Because at the end of the day, we may never get to know X, but we can play with the exposure to X, we can control a function of X, even if X itself remains vastly beyond our understanding. And that is exactly what this project is trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elise. I mean, I had the privilege of seeing this project, and it strikes me that it's incredibly current, and that it finds an architecture in the catastrophization of a current and past situation. It plays with ideas of intelligence when we are working towards a very complex form of intelligence, from the hyper-intelligent to the almost dumb when it comes to the layers of the highly sophisticated to the deeply analog. And I think that there's, an extraordinary capacity for you to absorb a huge amount of theory of mathematics, and to look forward and to find a kind of spatial articulation of something that is perhaps beyond our understanding. Thank you so much. Congratulations. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Anastasia.
Hey, I'm Anastasia. I'm from Dip 19. So what I'm going to try to do is present at the table, which is why the camera is on the screen. And I will play a film in the background, which will go for the entire presentation. Dancing on falling land. Cryocultural infrastructures on thawing permafrost. The Sakha Republic sits atop continuous permafrost. Its store risks releasing billions of tons of methane and CO2 into the warming atmosphere. This project seeks to make two distinct local festival traditions operative. in subverting the hegemonic technopolitical mechanisms for understanding, managing, and negotiating the stewardship of the region's unique soilscape. The Osohai is a circle dance ritual originally performed at the Isar, an annual celebration of Saha horse herders' arrival to summer pastures. It evolved in alasas, or meadows around Thermocast lakes in the taiga forest. This subarctic landform is the biocultural cradle of the Saha people, whose ancestors found refuge there from Mongolian conquests on their native steppe. Alasas form an ancient permafrost store depressions, unable to sustain large trees which rely on frozen soil to trap moisture close to their shallow roots. The resultant clearings accumulate meltwater and precipitation, filling and drying cyclically for centuries, gradually forming a richly stratified soil sprouting varied grasses. Serge, or horse hitching posts, grow out of this intricately formed soil as markers of alas occupancy and sacred festival infrastructure. During the Osohai, participants repeat 7-syllable chants after an improvisational singer, appealing to ancestral landscape spirits, establishing a participatory, reciprocal, embodied relationship with the frozen ground. By contrast, scientific understanding of permafrost relies on deeply extractivist logics, from its discovery by English explorers searching for gold ore, to its earliest Russian records by surtax collectors during Siberian colonization, to contemporary sensing technologies like seismic profiling works, carving cartographic abstractions into the physical landscape in search for valuable underground deposits, and thermometric boreholes developed from early military supply wells. Imperial and Soviet explorers discovered vast gold, gas, and diamond reserves in the Saha Republic, triggering a drastic agricultural reform to support the growing extractive industries. Between 1930 and 1960, Saha livelihoods were devastated by forced sedentarization and mechanization. Land between alasas was deforested for arable fields. The Isaf festival was displaced from the alas and appropriated by the state. Abandoned since USSR's collapse, these fields are particularly vulnerable to permafrost thaw due to their loss of an insulating forest cover. Thus, upon its gradual return to the alas, contemporary Isar unfolds amidst areas of characteristic hillocks left by thawing ice wedges, dubbed by locals as places where evil spirits have danced. During the state appropriation of the Isar, the Saha expressed dissent through Osohai appeals. My first proposal draws on this subversive potential to introduce new syncretic festival infrastructures engaging directly with the thawing soilscape. Building on current initiatives to establish a statewide permafrost monitoring system, I propose a network of Sergei sensors deployed across existing intersections of seismic profiling grid lines where their last meadows. These artifacts would hybridize Saha horse hitching posts with permafrost temperature monitoring boreholes and methane emission sensors, becoming interfaces with the permafrost data commons, giving rural Saha access to live permafrost degradation data, while simultaneously enabling analog recording of pastoralist climate observations previously excluded from scientific research. Annual data collection and maintenance would turn into a knowledge exchange ritual, while every 10 years the post would be adjusted to account for soil subsidence, marking the physical changes in the landscape. This intervention recognizes horse herding, dancing, and chanting as ways of knowing the changing soilscape. The alas, a workplace, research site, and festival ground, shared by humans and non-humans, defying imposed taxonomic separations. The Yakutsk fortress grew into an imperial expedition base around the time Peter the Great introduced a demi-military parade tradition into Russia. It flourished here due to the disproportionate military involvement of this remote region as a frontline manpower source and logistical node. Today, diamond extractors' headquarters dominate the Yakutsk city center, with their employees dominating the Labor Day workers' procession, a staple in Yakutsk's thriving parade culture. Per Stalin's Stalinist urban policy, Soviet Yakutsk was designed as festival infrastructure, featuring wide avenues for political processions, going through tribune-adorned squares, culminating in a park of cultural leisure, an original Soviet festival typology. Neoclassical facades line procession routes, attempting to conceal the sophisticated engineering required to sustain a city on permafrost, like piles raising buildings uncannily to just above the frozen ground, floating pipelines along flood management canals, turning Yakutsk into a city with its guts out, and relentless resurfacing of the heaving soil. Together with a standardized, Moscow-issued parade choreography and urban organization, These infrastructures produce an experiential distance between the parader's steps and the subarctic soilscape. Procession and infrastructure meet only once. A decorated pipeline gantry forms a new kind of triumphal arch, celebrating the conquest of frozen ground. However, as permafrost thaws, meltwater floods the city, while its sandy alluvial soil loses capacity to bear heavy loads. Despite attempts to delay the crisis through unregulated backfilling, cracks appear in the city's festival infrastructure, rendering its obfuscating logic unviable. Just like the Also High, parades hold subversive potential, channeled, for instance, by the Russian monstration movement, who tag onto the end of state-run Labor Day processions with absurdist slogans. My second intervention draws on this potential to foster a more direct engagement with the thawing permafrost by refurbishing the district heating pipeline, raising it to create a new parade route along a religiously future-proofed infrastructure. Precast, post-tension piles with integrated thermobraids would safeguard the pipeline through the thaw, displaying live changes in permafrost temperature to paraders, marching between thermal expansion loops, appropriated as sheltered procession stops. Recycling construction waste from thaw-related demolitions as aggregate for the new piles, this hybrid festive infrastructural spine would invert the city's existing spatial hierarchy by exposing key interfaces with the thawing soil. The city's techno-fix adaptation strategy would be pushed to breaking point, distributing limited resources to selectively protect this infrastructural corridor, letting other areas disintegrate as a sacrifice to the thaw.
Вот эти таяния в последнее время очень сильно наблюдаются. Говорят, в этом году еще сильнее будет таяние из-за того, что зима была теплой. Очень много воды, озера увеличиваются, сенокосные угодья под воду уходят.
State intervention, globalization, and climate change dispossess the Sahel of pastoralist practices through which tacit knowledge of and intricate bonds to the permafrost landscape are developed. The resultant crisis of meaning sparks new festival practices, increasingly appropriating Yakutsk's parade infrastructure. Recently, a group of women on Orджоникидзе Square encircled policemen in an Also High, calling for the return of their sons from Ukrainian front lines. However, in isolation from its biocultural context, Also High's mobilizing potential is easily redirected, its state-run form now wielded to promote military campaigns. Thus, the final intervention aims to reconnect Yakutsk's festival with the thawing ground on which they are performed. It subverts two existing proposals: the federally funded refurbishment of Lenin Square into a symbolic alas, with oversized serge and performance stage, and a plan to extend the city's parade axis into the floodplain, serving proposed reclamation developments designed to reduce flood risk, currently managed by military means. My proposal draws on the floodplain's existing value as functioning hayfield, pasture, and public space on a verdant riverine meadow, fertilized by nutrient-rich floodwater, by extending the parade axis into it without land reclamation, towards a new, semi-hardscaped square, inviting the Also High as parade culmination and otherwise. Floodwater would circulate freely through the porous Dabian base, filled with brick reclaimed from thaw-related demolitions, supporting a heave-friendly dancing surface, dissolving into the meadow. The Labor Day parade on May 1st would unfold on a dry, frozen landscape, followed by ice drift and a short flood, before Issaach is celebrated on a luscious green meadow in mid-June. Through seasonal use, flooding would be reconceptualized as a life-giving rather than destructive force, learning from the Sahel to inhabit waterlogged permafrost landscapes rather than filling them in. Together, the three proposed interventions channel radical uncertainty about global warming and permafrost thaw into a productive ambiguity between festival and protest, engaging in the loss of one world while singing another into existence.
I know you have enjoyed. I mean, this is an incredibly resonant and subtle project at the same time. I think the capacity to bring a kind of a deep knowledge of a site from a scientific perspective. I know you spent a huge amount of time there speaking to people and scientists, understanding the nature, the density of soil, the nature of the permafrost, the condition of the permafrost, and then to take that out to an understanding of, a deep vernacular tradition in a culture that you can't be familiar with and can't communicate with easily. And then to begin to link that into the way in which memory and tradition are appropriated by the state and how that can then be reversed as a cycle in order to navigate between the everyday and this kind of geological time. As I think, I've mentioned before, it's the beginning, I think, of a much longer project. And I wish you very, very well. Enormous congratulations. Thank you, Anastasia. I'd like to hand over to Leah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Leah, and I'm from Dip 8. And my project, An Ode to Estrangement, Reconstructing the Familiar, explores the emotional and spatial estrangement experience when returning home, specifically to Lebanon, by reimagining the abandoned Bshar al-Khoury mansion as a site of revival and adaptive reuse. By manipulating openings, walls, and spatial organization, it transforms estrangement into an opportunity for reconnection. Once a symbol of Lebanese heritage, the abandoned palace now mirrors the displacement of expats. Yet, in a city of many vacant heritage buildings, abandonment is not an end. It is an opportunity for return, transition, and communal living. Structured among the expats' journey, the project unfolds in 3 parts: the departure, the in-between, and the return. Exploring how memory and estrangement can inform a new architecture, one that exists between ruin and renewal. The journey begins with a departure. A home is left behind, sometimes by necessity, sometimes by choice. The expat leaves with memories still vivid of rooms, voices, and daily rituals that have not yet faded. But this departure is not personal. It is part of a collective movement that has reshaped Beirut over decades. War, political instability, and economic collapse have pushed millions of Lebanese to leave their home, turning Beirut into a ghost city waiting to be inhabited again. Among Beirut's symbolic typologies is the Central Hall House, with its symmetrical layout, triple arch windows, and central hall, surrounded by rooms forming public and private thresholds. Many of these homes stand abandoned today, yet for expats like myself, they remain more than just physical spaces. They are collections of memories, gatherings, and intimacy. And when they fall into ruin, returning home becomes an experience of estrangement rather than comfort. As Anthony Shadid once wrote, I wondered whether he was trying to return to a place that no longer existed. Isn't that always the case when we try to go home again? And this feeling of returning to somewhere that is no longer there is at the heart of estrangement, where the familiar feels distant and the past and present no longer align. Now a short film will follow, revealing glimpses of an abandoned home.
كيفك؟ قوليلي بعدهم عم بشقوا عليكي أو فلوا تركوكي؟ اشتقتي لنا؟ اشتقتي لصبحيات فيروز عم بتغني من شبابيكي؟ بعد الشمس عم تضرب على الصالون عم بتدفي السيراميك اللي كنا نقعد عليه نلعب طاولة؟ خبريني كيف بابك؟ بعدها مسكة الباب باردة؟ وبعدهم المفاتيح تحت الدعسة؟ كيف أوضة السفرة؟ بعد مذكرة صدى أصواتنا؟ الكبار جديين على الطاولة الكبيرة والصغار صريخن وضحكاتن على الصغيرة. أوضة القعدة بعدها ريحة القهوة والسيجارة. بعدهم الحيطان مذكرين الخناقات والضحكات من بعدها. وأوض النوم بعدهم تفوت مذكرين الألعاب اللي كنا نلعبها، القصورة اللي كنا نعمرها والقصص اللي كنا نحكيها. بدك تقوليلي شي؟ بعدهم الحيطان بيسألوا ليش رحنا؟ ليش فلينا؟ وإذا حنرجع؟ نحن هون إذا بدك تقولي لنا شي. سامعينك بس أنت سامعتينا؟
Now this home, like many others, exists in a state of in-betweenness. caught between memory and ruin, a condition reflected in the Bshara al-Khoury mansion, whose empty halls and decaying walls mirror the experience of returning to a place that is no longer the same. The mansion was actually built in 1886 in Zahle Blot, one of Beirut's oldest neighborhoods, which holds a special significance for expats. It is a reminder of what Beirut was, but also of what it has lost. Originally a private residence for Ibrahim al-Khoury, a wealthy merchant, the mansion remained a home until the 1960s when financial constraints led part of it to be rented, before being fully abandoned in 1999 after the last family member passed away. And today, decades of neglect have left the mansion in severe decay, with collapsed sections of its roof and gallery. Yet, its defining features remain. Sandstone walls, red-tiled roof, Baghdadi ceiling, cement tiles, and a garden leading to the main space, the central hall, surrounded by rooms including reception, living, dining rooms, and a kitchen. And a gallery wrapping around the building from east to west, connecting the central hall to outdoor spaces. Despite its historical significance, the mansion remains unprotected, surrounded by schools, universities, NGOs, and other neglected structures waiting for renewal. Its abandonment defines its in-betweenness, a structure suspended between ruin and memory. For the expats, the house is remembered from a distance, reconstructed through fragments, and nostalgia here is still idealized, a longing for what it was or what is believed to have been. But it's only with return that this memory is confronted, and nostalgia here begins to shift from longing to reflection. As Anthony Shadid wrote, we return thinking we'll find what we lost, but all we find is what has changed. And so expats return with layered nostalgias. Some would seek to rebuild the past, others would accept change, and some feel estranged, finding home unfamiliar. The architecture here does not resolve this tension, it just embraces it, shaping a new way of inhabiting the familiar. And to do this, the project explores spatial strategies of estrangement explored through these early explorations, and these strategies being rescaling by altering proportions of openings to shift perception and frame the familiar, distorting by introducing angled walls to delay recognition and evoke uncertainty, and fragmenting by layering walls to slow down movement and reflect disconnection. And these strategies are not literal responses to specific memories, but tools to let the architecture be open to longing, change, and estrangement itself. And these strategies would ultimately transform the Bshara al-Khoury mansion into a temporary residence for expats who would typically return during Christmas, Easter, and summer. And accordingly, a survey identified the demand for single, double, and triple rooms shaping the initial design. And after mapping surface and structural deterioration, I explored restoration strategies that are part of my TS, where environmental tests focused on airflow, daylight distribution, and thermal performance. And building on these findings, key modifications were introduced. The selective removal of walls extended the gallery into a continuous corridor connecting all rooms. The removal of the central hall first floor slab created a double height space, improving light, ventilation, and visual connections across levels. The addition of 2 floors introduced additional rooms, and modular timber partitions allowed adaptability for different patterns of return. And these interventions do more than just solve technical challenges. They create a spatial framework where memory and change can coexist. And this becomes more evident in the room themselves, where some walls remain with exposed original plaster, cracked tiles, and door frames, while others are concealed with white timber walls concealing the traces of the past. One level preserves the original floor tiles, while the other introduces timber flooring. These juxtapositions become physical expressions of layered nostalgia, where the architecture does not reconstruct the past, but holds it in tension with the present. And in the rooms, familiarity is delayed through angled walls that gradually reveal the central hall, creating a sequence of disorientation and recognition. The same logic defines the central hall, where sandstone walls coexist with new white surfaces, creating an architecture that accepts fragmentation as a way of remembering, confronting, and transforming. And this approach extends into the ground floor, where the central hall becomes a shared void, anchoring communal spaces, a kitchen and dining hall supporting rituals of cooking and gathering, and at the most public edge, a museum of lost and found, an evolving archive of letters, objects, and recordings left behind by expats, inviting both residents and passerby to engage with both personal and collective memory. In doing so, the palace becomes more than just a temporary residence for expats. It becomes a framework for reimagining estrangement, where the abandoned is not simply preserved, but reactivated as a site of renewal. Ultimately, An Ode to Estrangement proposes a future where Beirut's forgotten heritage becomes a tool for both preservation and transformation, supporting new ways of living, returning, and belonging. I'll just end here with a short film that brings all these ideas together. A return fell through space and memory.
أنا رجعت، المفتاح بعده بيفتح بنفس الزاوية تحت الدعسة ونفس التقل بإيدي. خليتيني فوت، ما حكيتي ما استعجلتي، بس خليتيني طل اتذكر اتوجع. أوضة القعدة حسيتها أكبر، الحيطان راحت، يمكن أنا صغرت أو يمكن أنت تنفستي بغيابي. الضوء بعده عم يفوت، عم يوصل لعندي، دافئ بطيء مألوف. هيدي الأوضة اللي بتعرف كل أصواتنا، وإن كانت القهوة تبرد على السياسة واللعب. وفيروز بعدها هون، أكيد بعدها. طاولة السفرة بعدها عندك، قربتيها شوي على قلبك، وين كنا نتقاسم الخبز والضحكات وما نعرف كيف نودعك. وتحتها البلاط نفسه بارد، بعده حامل تقل الكراسة ودعسات توزيع الأكل. سكون بعدما الكل يفل. الغرف فوق بعد عم بتطل علي، مميلة شوي كأنها ما عرفت. وجوا الحيطان حسيتها غريبة، كأنها مخبية شي الماضي تحت وجه جديد ناطر ينكشف. وقفت شوي، تركت السكون يهدى وخليت الغرابة تهدى. وكل غرفة بلشت تدلني، مش بالحكي بس بكيف عم بتميل الحيطان، بكيف عم ينفتح المنظر، لحد ما أخدوني ببطء بهدوء على السنترال هول، على أوضة القعدة لعندك. وأبعد شوي المتحف، السبيس بين السفر والرجعة. هون خليت الشغلات المهمة، الأكلات، التليفونات، تاجز المطار، ريحة الزعتر، وصفات داتا، باسبورات قديمة، والضحكات اللي ما حدا بيسترجي يمحيها. خليتيهم كلهم، تذكرتيهم عنا، وهيك تغيرتي، كبرتي. وما بعرف كيف بتشوقاتك، تجاعيدك، أثار الماضي فيكي، حسيتك عم تحضنيني، عم تسامحيني، عم بترجعيني على البيت.
سلم لي على الحبيب، عايشني الناس غريب، مش عارف مكري وين.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. I mean, I found this such a fascinating project because, you know, from the broad scope of the permafrost, it becomes this very intimate story of domesticity and the nature of the home. And it's a sort of curious idea that, you know, in the ruins of, you know, of this sort of merchant mansion, one inserts something like the scenography of a kind of expat imagination. And that with that, there's a sort of subversion of the way in which kind of ornate ornamentation and material then is left with this kind of blank slate and a shift in scale. And then obviously there's this kind of intense examination of a given condition. And I think I caught the end of your table, and I think I teased you that you were ready to build it, and you're like, absolutely, you're off to see the municipality. So again, a project that has a future, and what an extraordinary one. So thank you so much, Leah.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry for technical difficulties. Today, I'm delighted to present, to introduce you to Pulsation, the project that treats fragmentation and rupture of the water cycle of such entity as the Colorado River. The center is a single pulse. One after another, they generate a rhythm, pulsation. The series of impulses, simultaneous or scattered, they wave a network of flow. Pulsation, it's a new way of the water cycle. It's not continuous. It's a different hydrological reality, now unfolding on the Colorado River, flowing from the Rocky Mountains to the Gulf of California its path has been drawn, cut off, simulated, diverted, and retarded. I propose a systematic reordering of the water cycle, to read the Colorado River not as a flow, but as a pulsation. The Colorado River is pulsating, while it is still perceived through the lens of a continuous water cycle. Pumping activity, canals diversions, dam spills, power station, and irrigation sector demand, all treated as an external to the river's flow, sponsoring unlimited growth, progress, and demand. But they no longer interrupt the river, they compose it, shaping its movement as much as the original stream. Now the water moves upstream as much as downstream. It's detained, rerouted, accelerated, evaporated, and lost. This is not disruption. It's a choreography of pulsation. The new model of the water cycle proposed to understand, envision, and operate the river as a pulsation, observing every scale of the movement as a complete network of impulses shaped by its diversions. It reframes control as embodied and proposes a new epistemology of the landscape based on rhythm, reoccurrence, and responsiveness. To see the river as a pulsation is to understand the water within the whole network, as it is in the moment, as a system of actions shaped by human interventions, flow, and climate change. Only by embracing the entire cycle, we recognize the water is still there. The Colorado Delta, for instance, will never be restored. Its original form cannot return. In restoration spaces, damage is mitigated, localized, restrained, a stark emblem of the American dream, to return the river as it was. But restoration follows a human rhythm, faster, deliberate, more abrupt. In this acceleration lies a deeper refusal, the denial of the river as a changing, self-regulating system. But was there ever enough water? The Colorado Compact, split the river in half since 1920s, was built on a promise stretched too far. Water on paper, not in the river. A simple overestimate. 16 million acre-feet in the river that rarely gave more than 14. The cities and agriculture grew on this myth. But law grants rights to water, not to its reality. Each state claims its share through new infrastructure until federal shortages, a century later announced. At the US-Mexico border, control state of the entity persists, even in tension. Beyond the compact means putting question differently. Not how to share, but how to work with water as it is now. Delayed, fragmented, intermediately released. The myth of continuity breaks the silence between pulses. Located along like beehives, agricultural zones are soaking up 79% of the river flow. In the desert landscape, the land is levied and deeply ribbed. Privately owned farming flattens the landscape, offering the country one of the most productive agricultural areas. While in the original water cycle of this place, the Hopi lived there, embodied it through rituals. The snake dance, a dialogue with rain, with flow. Abby Warburg saw in them a path of ancestral continuity, but both were mistaken. There was never continuity, not in a cycle, not in a river, not in a system. After them came Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson. Cities rising from the desert, built on the illusion of the abundant water. Canals were carved to serve people, then bent towards irrigation. From these channels, several pivot systems stretched across the sand like serpents, dividing and redividing, forming a new geometry of flow. These artificial oases feed the nation, but not with food for people. Alfalfa, foreign to this region, thirsty beyond reason, was planted to feed cattle and serve export. The land is levied, the soil ripped, productivity replaced the sacredness of water. The relationship to water is no longer just exploitative, it's recruitive. But countries rely on these agricultural areas. Individuals and state farming are integral to the economy and cannot be cut or minimized. Major water cutoffs won't bring just a water crisis, but an economic one. But the relocation is possible until everyone gets their share. Today, we must reframe the river as a pulsation, not continuous but fragmented, stored in contracts, reservoired, buried pipelines. Between the releases, the myth of flow dissolves. In its place, a rhythm of rupture, where water moves in the beats, and agency returns through responsiveness, not permanence, but pulse. Strategic spacing is only possible through pulsation. Treating each field as part of the larger system of interrelation, not as an isolated unit, relocation becomes visible when crops are matched not just to the soil nutrients, but to water availability, infrastructure proximity, and rotational logic. Alfalfa should serve as a marker. Zoning for planting must account for crop type, field location, and irrigation access. Individual farmers should submit desired planting locations along with a soil test to obtain license approval for planting high-demand water crops. Centralized location should be avoided. Instead, such crops must be planted closer to the canals on the river, where leaks and spills turned into strategic advantages. This approach offers a realistic, responsive system for individual agriculture, where control is limited, but coordination and strategical thinking are essential. To act within the pulsation means to account for all it moves. Turbidity from pumping plants, evaporation rates from canals, water stress index in agricultural sectors, land cover changes, natural heights. All must be considered to delay, release, redirect, keep, or lose water in the right places. Water flows through the canal, pause, evaporation increases. Through the pumping plant, it's turned, redirected, circulated across other fields. The less water there is to push, the harsher the pulse. At Whiteside pumping plant, demand drives timing. Its operation should be limited, delivering fewer, sharper pulses. Pre-planned with reservoir intake and time to rainfall and climate-driven refuel. Precision becomes necessity. The Yuma project was the first manifestation of control. Its dam, once a gateway to the Colorado, now supplemented by the Imperial, a 5-kilometer wide diversion zone nearly at the border, where water once spilled and flowed freely. Today, this space can be seasonally flooded to store sediment, enrich flow, and revive recurring wetlands. Control should be not abandoned, but rearticulated to shape a more natural water landscape, working with topography, not against it. The water cycle must be enriched with new parameters, its sacredness redefined. Like Hopi, we must move with water, but across expanded dimensions, to see where it comes, goes, evaporates, returns, is to know the water is still there. Designing through pulsation means treating rupture, rhythm, and absence as fundamental spatial and infrastructural elements. Pulsation is a new model of the water cycle. Tracing this beat, a system of interruptions, fragments, and false abundance, is to encounter responsiveness, an architecture that adapts, acts locally in rupture, embracing intermediacy and operational rhythm, restoring agency to human and non-human actants in the hydrological reality where permanence is no longer possible, only pulse. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, I mean, this is a project that interests me a lot. Like for my sins, I did a fair amount on American landscapes, and particularly at this moment of, global political upheaval. I think that so much of, American constitutional thinking was really founded around ideas of landscape, how to navigate it, how to control it, how to use it as a resource, how to understand a resource as something that is kind of future-proofed, and then giving way to how one turns sort of long indigenous knowledge into something that is understood through cybernetic means. Is a kind of extraordinary kind of full circle to move between the kind of deep historic things that have shaped what is now a fragile American political system and a kind of a deep ecological disaster. So a really important project. Thank you so much. Now I want to hand over to Alejandro.
Hi, my name is Alejandro del Castillo, and I will present my project Surrogate, from sheltering the body to simulating it.
You look lonely. I can fix that.
I can fix that. It's a promise we've heard before. From screens, from apps, from products that commodify intimacy. We're repeatedly told that technology can repair our emotional deficits. That loneliness can be fixed with better design, better interfaces, better algorithms. But loneliness today isn't just a personal feeling. It's the outcome of systemic neglect. It is the result of a culture that glorifies autonomy while quietly eroding infrastructures of care. We live more and more of our lives indoors, alone, in parallel with a steady increase in the percentage of single-person households across the world. And yet our need for companionship hasn't diminished. We know that prolonged isolation causes psychological and physical decline. Just think of solitary confinement. We are not built for this much aloneness, and yet this is the world we've built. From TikTok confessions to Reddit threads like Are Lonely, people are reaching for others in whatever way they can. Even dating apps like Grindr, built for encounters, have turned into endless scrolls of avatars. No touch, no voice, just images. This loneliness is not just about being alone. It's about the unmet need for physical presence. And presence is not just visual. It is a multisensory experience. Affective touch, soft, warm, rhythmic, activates C-tactile afferents, releases oxytocin, reduces cortisol, and slows the heart rate. It calms, it affirms, it connects. So as touch disappears from daily life, we search for substitutes, from virtual to embodied to speculative. Our need for closeness often redirects itself, sometimes dangerously. Attempts to mediate loneliness are not new. From digital pixelated pets that simulate dependency and create a feedback loop of care, to mobile games centered on developing romantic relationships with virtual characters. From animatronic toys whose engineered responsiveness creates the illusion of life, to breathing plush pets that simulate presence without asking for anything in return. To pillows shaped like half a torso that mimic the feeling of being held. To robotic limbs that replicate the feeling of walking hand in hand, complete with sweat, temperature, and subtle twitches. From disembodied operating systems, where intimacy is mediated by voice and memory,
Where are you?
to projection systems grafted onto the home, allowing a hologram companion to exist in domestic space.
Voila. Bon appetit.
To artificial bodies that provoke real, emotional, and ethical entanglements. These surrogates form a cultural lineage, from lifelike to abstract, from familiar to uncanny. They are not replacements for human beings, but they reveal something crucial, that presence does not need to be real to be felt, that care can be engineered. Architecture has long operated as a mediator between the human body and the environment, managing light, air, heat, humidity. Philip Ram frames architecture as a system of physiological support. But today, discomfort is no longer just environmental. It is emotional, sensorial, social. Building on this speculative lineage, Surrogate poses the question, as human intimacy becomes increasingly mediated by impersonal interfaces, what are the implications of developing spatial technologies that not only reflect but reshape our affective dependencies? And how might these architectures reinforce or reimagine the conditions of care? Surrogate is a system, a prosthetic logic applied to emotional need. It reimagines the domestic, not as a space of withdrawal, but as an interface of support. A space made not just to contain us, but to co-regulate with us. A home adaptation system that can be accessed through public health services. The process is simple. A doctor refers you, or you apply online. A care specialist visits, takes notes, calibrates needs, and a few weeks later, it arrives. Installed and tuned precisely, ranging from standardized units to bespoke designs. Surrogate is architecture that doesn't just shelter the body, but simulate it and respond to it. The technological infrastructure already exists. Platinum Cure silicone, as you can see on the table, is where it all begins. Originally developed for medical prosthetics, durable, flexible, skin-like, it has since been adapted through several industries. In film, where it simulates realism down to pores and blemishes, in sculpture, where it exaggerates the body, and in the sex industry, where it must feel convincingly human. And its surrogate, it becomes architecture. Behind the silicone skin, inflatable cushions, hydraulic pistons, pressure actuators, contact sensors, microheaters, LEDs, speakers, scent dispensers, a complex orchestration of function, a choreography of responsiveness. When you are held by surrogate, it doesn't pretend to know what's wrong. It breathes slowly beneath you, silicone skin warming to your touch. A presence that doesn't ask questions, one that is always there for you. It responds with gentle pressure, a limb that presses back when held, a surface that yields, softly but deliberately. Some variations move subtly with mechanical actuators. Others stay still, but remember. Warmth lingers where you last touched it. Light pulls where you leaned in. Some are silent. Others hum, purr, or even speak. Surrogate communicates in layers, through vibrations, temperature, pressure, light, and sound. It can also act as a proxy, paired across distance. It mirrors gestures and translates warmth. A partner squeeze echoed in your hand, an intimacy translated and transplaced through silicone. Surrogate is not a perfect simulation, and it is not meant to be. The illusion is only partial, but it is accepted, even welcomed, because it answers a need. It is a fiction the body chooses to believe. Architecture has traditionally shaped climates of comfort. Now, it begins to shape emotional climates. Surrogate suites sits between two potential near futures. One, imagined by the Care Collective, built on interdependence and decommodified visions of care. The other, described by Paul Virilio, of technological optimism and systemic solitude. It doesn't resolve this tension. It exists in the ambiguity between radical forms of care and the fetishization of technology, between collective infrastructure and synthetic companionship. Surrogate does not offer a solution. Instead, it asks, what role does architecture play when presence is simulated? When care becomes interface? Can a wall hold us the way a person once did? Is this a vision of the future, or is it simply showing us what care already looks like? Abstracted, automated, quietly disappearing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alejandro. It's like I read the little book of loneliness, which is one of the most tragic things I've seen in a long time. I think it's something that, you know, for those of you who, most of you have lived through COVID at some point, some of you together with others, some of you alone. And it's such an important aspect of particularly those who have family that are growing old and are alone and one can't be with them as often as one would like. And I think it always also goes back to, you know, we've moved out of traditional cultures that have the protocols of engagement and socialization and intimacy into a world in which we're expected to be entirely authentic and entirely open, which has very few means to navigate as a territory. And somehow, how one starts to interact with something that is not entirely human, maybe calls for a return to a different kind of protocol, which I find super interesting. And this feels, again, like it's sort of just touching the surface, literally and figuratively. So I want to thank you so much, and also for bringing such a kind of unique vision to the table. So thank you, Alejandro. Last but not least, Jana.
Hi, my name is Jana. I'm in Diploma 17, and I'd like to present my project, Reframing Stone. I'd like to start from a quote from the myth of Sisyphus, stating, "There's no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn." These words remind us that even in the harshest of circumstances, the act of resisting despair is a profound act of inner resilience. In the West Bank, the proposition of architecture is an act of hope that asserts a power possibility. It serves as a balance between action and research, investigation, and proposal. The project begins with a landscape, specifically the stone quarries, exploring how a material of great cultural influence creates power. Browsing past the terrain of the West Bank, you find these ambiguous scars from satellite distances. From my own mapping, I've documented 85 quarries that engulf millions of square meters, some nested between olive terraces, some creeping into towns, and others more discreetly embedded. Following the division of the land into zone under the Oslo Accords of 1994, 60% of the West Bank was under Israeli military law, and only 18% was under the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Within such rich limestone landscapes, quarrying operations date from before the Ottoman Empire. However, under the colonies of the British Mandate, the use of stone quickly escalated. So forming cascading domes across the mountainous terrain of the West Bank, these structures reflect the vernacular tradition, binding the architecture to its landscape. In this project, I aim to play with the balance of the domes emerging and sinking into the landscape. The iterative design process became a study of balance, testing the dialogue between the walls and the retaining walls, between the domes and the retaining walls, where domes fully enclosed within perimeter walls were set aside, giving way to forms that form retentions themselves, shaping courtyards, framing entrances, and unfolding into quiet, walkable edges. Today, stone operations play a powerful role threatening to erode the very identity of the region, while generating pressing concerns around displacement and public safety. But what defines the present use of stone is the aftermath of the years regulating it, tracing the legal framework to find the shifting points from 1918's Ronald Soares law stating that all Jerusalem construction must be in limestone, to the pre-military accords 158, 59, and 145 that states Israel's control of the extraction and distribution of the natural resources. From there, stone was rarely used in the Palestinian landscape. With the highest rate of production in the MENA region, 75% of stone is exported around the world through Israel. And to escalate matters more, in 1993, the city engineer Elina Berashi put in place a state policy for Jerusalem where she states there's a government decision to maintain the population between Arabs and Israeli at 28% Arab and 72% Israeli, a policy that enforces demographic control. So between 1987 to the 2000s, many Palestinians moved away from their homes in Zone C. Many agricultural sites that once bounded the social life of these villages eroded. Architecture became a geopolitical issue as well as an internal intimidation. With looming walls reaching 9 meters high and 1 meter thick, breaching the UN Green Line, it became a source of expropriation. Internally, the pressure to demolish these old urban cores and build concrete high-rise followed, with funding for expensive towers in Zone A by the Gulf region. Whilst the prime target in Zone C's have been spaces of education and social life, many schools residing in these zones face multiple demolitions, and pupils are often relocated, disrupting their education. In 2024 alone, 212 schools in Gaza have been demolished, and 57 schools in the West Bank are under demolition order. And residing in the same zone, most quarries tend to be shut down, either through the revocation of permits or the confiscation of equipment, rendering them abandoned. Through the interactive map that you can see on the side, as well as a book filled with quarries, you can see that there's 11 illegal Israeli quarries on Palestinian land, while the rest are unknown. So the project addresses historic issues of manufacturing powers, the entrenched border on the landscape, alongside the present concerns of education. In such a turbulent terrain, site selection is vital. Mapping borders, spaces of incidence, and quarries served as a guideline, where the proposition will be part of a system, utilizing the unknown quarries and the quasi routes as a resource to initiate a sequence of scattered building unifying the landscape, from the unwrapped ground to the beginning of a new infrastructure. Situated in Zone B, on the eastern outskirts of Ramallah, the project connects the larger cities to the zone of demolitions, creating a buffer for social life and education. The territory and aforementioned buffer is surrounded by 6 stone quarries and have direct routes to Ramallah center, either through a few minutes drive or a 10-minute walk. Therefore, the proposition is in close proximity to the resources it will require, while avoiding checkpoints and road closures. Inspired by NGOs like Wallah We Can, Baladna, and Riwaq, I focus on Baladna's youth centers across Palestine, which address the shifting needs of the children and adolescents. Although people in the West Bank have aimed to create a sense of stability and continuity in the students' education, they're still often forced to educate in conditions of no shelter and limited resources. So through the phosphorus pits and the once abandoned hills, the projects become a form of resistance. Situated on the hilltops of the West Bank, it remains both visible and protected, overlooking a landscape that's amidst constant change. The project not only offers a sense of safety and shelter, but also weaves an interplay of levels, creating an interactive playground that doubles as a series of classroom and spaces for study. Having visited some stone quarries in the UK and Lebanon, I began to understand the process behind cutting and shaping stone. I found that regular quarrying operations result in 30% waste, and with the multiplicity of abandoned quarries and dump sites, large remnants of stone offcuts and blocks are abandoned on site. By identifying the quarries and the stone remnants as a useful tool, the project will work in collaboration with Riwaq to create an architecture aligned with the social and cultural expression of the people, but also bridging Riwaq's mission of sustainable stone with Baladna's efforts to create a space for the youth. In this sense, the making and the running of the building will become a participatory process, an architecture formed through a collective engagement and a shared purpose. It will draw from the shared craft of stone shaping to create an architecture marked by irregularity and character. And through speaking through the local stone suppliers and engineer, I identified the local dimensions of stone blocks at a thickness of 25 centimeters per block and 6 centimeters per clad, a thickness that will be based for the tectonic. The enclosure is therefore met with rough, irregular walls, a textured roof, and a smooth concrete floor, connecting people to the craft and history of stonemasonry. Working from the ground, the building's first layer is cast. From the concrete ring beam to the stones, which are carefully placed on a bed of sand, a forgiving formwork creating a jagged surface. A cardboard waffle structure forms the base, gently holding the sand, resting simply on the table below. And the walls become a system, compressing the domes in place, shifting in materiality from earth to stone. Where the unfolding to expose continuous ceilings that the domes sit on. The vaulted spaces and the domes then formulate a shift between an openness and an enclosure, where one structure simply sits on the walls while the other is confined within it. Lighting forms the guideline for the spaces. Through the slit entrances, panoramic opening, and diffuse lighting, the building transforms from education to reflection to public use. From conceptual sketches to digital exploration, I set the conditions for the space, using smaller openings that sit underneath the ring beam or facade openings from the design courtyards. The physical models therefore facilitate the exploration of real-world conditions, where the ratio to solid to openness was tested for the crucial community spaces. The project is liminal metaphorically in its nature, existing at the threshold between a needed action and an anticipated vision, but it's also liminal physically, through it residing at the zone between two thresholds of powers. As an initial proposal, I aim to build a school that can host the students suffering from the demolition orders. It will be able to employ teachers from Ramallah Center and host pupils from Zone A and C alike, but it will be much more than that. It will be a dynamic home. Inspired by the Galilee's Foundation centers, it will host charities, companies, NGOs, and the local community, which will allow for a diverse range of programs to take place within its walls. And the interplay between the walls and the domes create these series of double-edged conditions, where the walls never meet at an end, creating roots for play, for study, for community, transforming a formal journey of a school into an informal field of activities. An interplay of exposed courtyards, sunken spaces are created, where the roofscapes invite movements and pause. Architectural elements are reimagined. The wall, once harsh and divisive, becomes a continuous playful gesture. Its rigid concrete is softened by textured stone, shifting from a barrier into an articulation. where the walkable, livable terrains are shaped for rest, for gathering, and for quiet moments of leisure, integrating the roof and the sunken spaces into a unified landscape. The retaining walls on the eastern and western facades fold inwards to create these entrances, as well as the courtyards, compressing the domes in place on the two sides, whilst the internal walls join the two domes perpendicularly, simply sitting underneath the ring beam. Serving as a space for transformation, education, conservation, and initiatives, the adaptation of the space is vital. The program draws from the educational practices, reimagining them as shared collective spaces of learning and exchange, where confinement of one space expands in multiple directions, and the vaults and the domes become central to this language of multiplicity, offering spatial variety through both expansion and intimacy. Whether a quiet study beneath the dome, an intimate gathering under the open sky, or a shared moment in the public outdoor space, each condition is shaped by the rhythm of the site and the needs of its people. To end on a quote by Edward Said, where he states, in history of colonial invasions, maps are always first drawn by the victors, since maps are instruments of conquest. Geography is therefore the act of war, but it can also be the art of resistance, if there's a counter map. Through the proposition of architecture, the building contributes to the counter map, where it looks at the architect's projective capacity and aims to balance a proposition based on research, grounded in the existing conditions and their aftermath, but also based on resilience, where there's a paramount need to propose for now and for a transformative future. So the proposition examines the architect's ability to project forward, combating the ongoing news and embracing resilience. And therefore, the proposition doesn't only aim to materialize in what can be considered an urban space, but also a political space. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jana. I became familiar with your work through the Writing Prize and an extraordinary amount of research that you've done to track down all of these quarries and to understand the conditions of labor, etc. And then I'm kind of brought back to, you end on quite a hopeful note, and I know this only anecdotally, so the Italians in the room, please correct me. But after the Second World War, in the Reggio Emilia, there was a decision to what to use the money on. And apparently, says my former mother-in-law, the men all said they should build a theatre and the women said they should build a school. And that school became the basis for things like, it's akin to very much like Montessori, etc. But fundamentally, it was a way of teaching young people how to be part of a community, how to be citizens, how to become part of society, kind of from the ground up, post-destruction. And I think somehow picking the school and aligning it to something that is geological, rock that was formed before people were on the ground, in a region that is kind of like the origin of the beginning of all things, all the mythologies about humanity, about destruction have stemmed from this region, but that somehow working back with the land, you're tapping into something that is fundamental and also has hope for how we can all be decent citizens. Thank you. Well, that's all, folks. But I want to say, what an amazing year. It's not over. You guys are going to dive into projects review. I hope you understand that the theme is one of, I suppose, pluralism, but coming together with a rich discussion that will somehow manifest in the work and would be visible to all. It's been a tremendous year. You'll hear from me again formally at graduation. But to our honors students, an enormous congratulations for a really, really epic work. Go and have a drink or whatever, however you celebrate. Very, very well done. Thank you.